Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Good? Having a good Unite Sydney? Cool. Yeah, there we go. I knew there was some energy. OK, so we're going to talk about new 2D features. I'm Russ Scammell, product manager for 2D at Unity. And we've got a bunch of stuff that we've been updating. We've got some stuff that's new. And I want to showcase some of it. We're going to have some slides, but we're also going to spend a lot of time in Unity, which is more exciting, more interesting. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the audience. I always want to know who I'm speaking to. And 2D is an interesting field. People who make 2D games are really cool. So no pandering, of course. Who are the artists in the room? Can I get a show of hands? Artists. Cool. Any designers in the room? OK, some of the same hands. Cool. How about coders? Any coders, programmers? There you go. All right. It's not a Unite without coders. And any producers? Any producers? OK. So some stuff is getting done. Cool. OK, so we're going to jump right into it. We've got a lot to cover. So let's start with world building. So for the world building tools, Sprite Shape is where a lot of the action has been recently. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about are in packages. So I'm going to explain how you can get hold of them later. So for Sprite Shape, a lot of the changes have been around performance and some workflow improvements. So we've used C# jobs to get faster, more accurate collider generation, faster mesh generation as well. We've improved the sprite variant selection. So if any of you have used Sprite Shape, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, then you'll see it for the first time today. Fills have gotten stretch UVs, so you can do something a bit more interesting with them. And we've improved the tangents on the Sprite Shape spline. So let's dig in and look at some demos, because slides are just words on a page, right? Let's look at the tangents in action and also how those sprite variants work. Cool. OK, swap over to Unity. Oh, yeah, that's the new red toolbar, special feature in Unity. Just joking. You shouldn't see that. OK, so here, this is a Sprite Shape. For those of you who have not used it, who has used the Sprite Shape before in 2D? OK, so the idea here is that we've defined some sprites, and they are tiling on a shape, on a spline. And you can also define the inside or the fill, right? So think of it like a stroke and fill system. OK, so if we take a look at the spline here, we can see this is just an ordinary spline. You can move it around. And at the moment, we've got a sprite, which is just a green box, right? So it's this sprite here, right? But what I've also got is I've got a couple of variants that I may want to swap to. And what you used to have to do was to remember the index of the variant in this, which is the Sprite Shape profile. So you'd have all these different variants in there, all set up. And you might want to switch between them, right? So then by selecting the variant, Sprite Shape in the scene, I can just select one of these. And now we've got a new visual sprite variant display. So you can just go in there and go, well, for this segment, I want this variant. And for this segment, I want this variant. And I can do stuff like that, right? I can also go in and just change all of them at once to something a bit more realistic. Or maybe I want kind of a grassy fringe or some kind of the beginnings of a wreath here, right? OK. So once I've got this, that's cool. But I want to show you how we've improved some of the workflows around the controls. So now you can go in and so you've always been able to change these controls from broken to smooth. We've now added the ability, if you hold down Shift, to keep these controls mirrored. So this was a pain point for a lot of people who were using it previously. If I let go of Shift, I can now move that independently. So again, for those of you who are new to Sprite Shape, what you're seeing here is a sprite tiled along this spline. Yeah? So then you can go in and you can make all sorts of interesting additions and change the variance on all of those. Cool. So let's look at the fill. So there's a fill texture here. There's a space for you to drag a fill in. And what I want to bring in is the rock fill, right? So there you go. And then let's change that, the variant on the outside, back to a grassy fringe, right? So you can see this is kind of, you can imagine building a level from something like this. So what I want to do now is show you stretch UVs. So the fill UVs down here used to be just like so. You could have them there, you could have them placed, but as you move the spline around, it would just repeat. Yeah? It would just tile to fill in the sections inside. But maybe you want to do something a bit more interesting. So we've had world space UV for a while, so that's good when you want different sections of sprite shapes to connect with each other. That way it's just a unified world space UV. Or maybe you want the UVs inside to stretch, right? So I'm going to turn on stretch UVs, so now we can see that the UVs actually stretch out to fill, and if they get too big, you can always go in there and turn up the stretch tiling. Right? Cool. So that's the additions that we've been making for Sprite Shape. Let's swap over to animation. So how many of you have used the 2D animation package? Show of hands? Ah, okay. Cool. So for animation, or 2D sprite rigging, strictly speaking, what's new is sprite swap. So this has been a feature that has been requested a lot by the community. So thank you for those of you who are coming to the forums and giving us all that feedback, because we're basically guided by what you say you want or what your projects need. So the idea with sprite swap is to solve this problem of you have a sprite somewhere in the scene, right? And you want variants of it. Now, this can be a simple problem. It can just be turning on and off all the different variations that you have, or you may want to animate. It's a lot harder if you want to animate a sprite swap. To add to the complexity, you often want to do a sprite swap on a rigged character, right? So maybe the example I'll show you in a minute, maybe you're playing a game of rock, paper, scissors, right? And the character has a hand that can either be a rock, right, paper, or scissors. So you've got these different sprites rigged to the last bone in your character, and you want to be able to swap between them, right? This is also really useful in games where the characters are emoting a lot, and they want to do stuff with their hands. Yeah, that was really good, or peace, something like this. One of the other use cases is, well, I'll mention the general case, which is a wardrobe system, right? So you've rigged a character, your generic mannequin, right? And you've made all of these fantastic animations. And then now you want to transfer those animations to other characters, right? Which have been rigged. So these are deformed sprites that you want to transfer that animation to. So the same concept holds. I'll show you the result, and then I'll explain a little bit how we do it. Cool. Let's take a look. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to start in Photoshop. Okay, so you've got a character something like this, right? And what we've got here is different layers set up, and then we've got a layer group, right? And in this layer group, we've got these alternatives. She can either be giving a thumbs up, or she's got an open palm, right? Cool. So we've been able to rig multi-layered sprites like this for a while. We basically bring them into Unity and convert them into a prefab with different layers. And I'll show you how that looks here. Sorry, give me a sec. OK, so this is the character that we brought in just now. So the first thing to realize is we're using a PSD importer package to do this. Again, I'll put up a single screen at the end of all the different packages that are involved in doing all of this stuff. And what happens is, if we look at this part here, especially in the inspector, you can see that we can control a bunch of things about what to do with the data that's coming in, right? So we've got import hidden, or we've got mosaic. Mosaic will give you a sprite sheet. I'll show you how that works in a minute. So we've got mosaic on. We've got character rig. Again, that will set this up for character rigging. You can use layer grouping to do stuff if you want to give meaning to those layers or the groups of layers. And then you can take a look at how all of that works in the sprite editor. So what's the result of importing one of these? Something to keep in mind, this is a PSB file, that's B, because at the moment the PSD format cannot be imported in different ways. This will change in the future. For the time being, that's as simple as saving out your PSDs as a PSB. You can even rename a PSD to PSB, because under the hood, they are the same. They are very, very similar, let's say. OK, so let's take a look at the sprite editor. So this is what the character looks like. Now, keep in mind, in Photoshop, it was overlaid, right? It was in layers. So we've brought it into Unity, and it's been made into a sprite sheet for us, which is cool. So this is what the texture looks like. What we want to look at is the skinning editor. So in the skinning editor, we've actually set up this character so that it looks like the way you organized it in Photoshop. Right? So all of that layering work that your artists have done, all of the positioning of layers, all of the different variants are there, right? And you can see them. Cool. So I won't dig into this now. There are other talks on this online, and you can read the documentation on how this system works. It's a good half-hour talk just by itself. The basic idea is that you can rig a character, you can bring in the sprites, generate geometry, add bones, use those bones to deform the geometry, paint weights to build a relationship between the bones and the geometry, and so on and so forth. What you haven't been able to do until today is define variations on sprites. And this is important because you may be using phonemes for the mouth, you may be using eye blinks, you may want to do, as we're going to see for this character, you may be changing between two sprites on the hand here, on the left hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up let's maximize this. OK. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the visibility tool. So one small addition we made here is the visibility tool stays open now. It's a little bit sticky at the moment. Maybe I won't maximize this right now. OK. So you can resize this, and you can see your bone structure in here as well as your sprites. And this is where the new change is. So in the sprites, you can now set up categories and indexes and indices for the different parts of the sprite. So this is a hierarchy of sprites that looks like the hierarchy that we had in Photoshop. So we're interpreting some of that layer grouping here. Cool. So we've got this left hand. And what we wanted to do, I've actually done this beforehand, but never mind. We'll leave it there. What you can do here is you can right-click on the category, right-click on the group, sorry, and you can convert that into a category. Okay? What that means is we're going to define these sprites as belonging to the same category, right, which is right hand. And then we have different indexes for this, 0 and 1. Cool. So this means that we can access this data and do something with it, right? We can swap it. So this is one way of defining a sprite swap, especially in this particular case of a rigged character. Cool, so what does this do, right? So I did all of that. I hit apply when I'm done. And let's take a look at the character that we've brought into the scene. So the first thing you'll notice is at the top level, it generated something called a sprite library. Right? So a sprite library is a collection of sprites, right? And it's organized by category and index. Right? So you can go into a library and you can request, from this category, I want index this. And the way you do that, the component that works with this is this one here. So let's look at the right hand, and we'll see a sprite resolver component. And what that does is it goes up into the category here. We can see right hand, and it chooses a particular index, right? And you can see it's taken the name open palm because that's what we named it in Photoshop. So all of that information that came out of Photoshop comes into Unity, and you can use it to do some cool stuff. So then you can do this, right? So all good? I don't know, sure. Cool. So why is this cool, right? So previously, if you tried to animate stuff like this, you'd run into a problem where you can't share the clip because the clip is bound to the sprite, and that's a bit of a problem. In this case, the animation is simply an index, right? So animating an int. So let's look at the animated example of this. Okay, I'm just going to open this up. And if we click on this character and we look at the animation here, we've got a right-hand sprite resolver index that we're animating. We can actually key for that, and it changes along with the animation that moves her bones, right? So let's just hit play on that and see if it works out. There we go. Cool. So we can get a little bit more complex with the kind of rigged sprite animations that we're doing in Unity. Cool. I think I missed a couple of slides. I jumped straight into Unity because that's what I always want to do. So maybe a recap. No. No slides missed. Good. Okay, so we've done world building, we've done animation, right? Let's talk about graphics. This is where we've been doing quite a lot of work recently. So the big one is we've got a 2D renderer in the lightweight render pipeline. So we've been working with the lightweight team to make sure that there is a 2D specific renderer that lives in lightweight. And from that, you get all of this stuff, right? So 2D lights, which we're going to focus on today. So the Pixel Perfect camera, if you've been using that, the idea was to incorporate it into this. So the existing package, the existing component, is identical to the one that we have here. But the standalone package that you can get now will eventually be deprecated, but we are going to keep adding bug fixes for the time being. The idea is that all new features will come in here, right? Any new stuff for graphics will be part of the 2D renderer. This also means, and this I'm really excited about, it means that we can unlock shader graph, right, for 2D. So you can get master nodes for lit sprites as well as unlit sprites, and then you can build all that really cool shader graph stuff into there. Now keep in mind this is fairly early days. It is going to go out with the next build of Lightweight, so it's not available immediately after this talk. And even when it is available, it will be early. It does all work and it is pretty cool, but we want to get feedback on the workflows, right? Because lighting is a thing that can mean many things to many different people, or different things to different people. So we want your feedback. Cool. So let's take a look at the parts that make this up so that you'll understand what I'm doing later. So there's the 2D light component. So there's various types of lights in there. We're going to look at a bunch of them. You can do parametric lights. You can do freeform lights. You can do point lights. There's a bunch of things. Really, really fun stuff. And then there's the 2D renderer asset. So this is the 2D renderer data that you add to lightweight render pipeline to get 2D rendering working. And what I'm going to dig in a little bit later is these light blend styles that we see here. So this is a way of simplifying kind of that blending, those blending modes of the lights that you're going to be using for 2D. Cool. Related features, as I mentioned just now, but this one is I didn't mention, is a secondary textures module in the sprite editor window. So again, this is a common request and is actually required for certain kinds of lights. So now you can define a set of associated sprites or associated textures that go alongside your sprite. So what we're talking about here is you've got your normal sprite, right? Your ordinary sprite, your flat sprite, or your diffuse sprite. And then maybe you want to add some depth to it, or you want to do something with normal, so you can define a normal map that works alongside that. And then maybe other maps, masks, and things like that. And we're going to look at a couple of them today and how they work. and what you can do with them. And mentioned earlier, shader graph master nodes, right? So these all work together. Cool. So we're going to spend a bit of time looking at some demos. How are we doing for time? We're good? We're going to look at the different light types, right? Play around with them a little bit. We're going to look at normal maps, because everyone wants to add normal maps to sprites. So they had to be done, and they're really fun. And masks. So for more kind of granular approach to effects, we can play around with masks. Cool. Let's get into Unity. Almost there. Too far ahead. We'll come back. OK, so let's dig in a little bit and talk about how to set this up, right? So when you do get this package, how would you assemble all the pieces? So the first thing to realize is you need to be in lightweight render pipeline. So to do that, you want to go into project settings. And under graphics, under your scriptable render pipeline, you've got lightweight render pipeline. OK, that's the first step. Now, a lightweight render pipeline asset looks like this. And here, right at the top, we've got renderer type custom, and data is 2D renderer. We may simplify this in the future because there's quite a couple of steps here, which is neither here nor there, but may not be ideal. And what you want to do is make sure this is set up. And you can create one of those by just right-clicking, create, rendering, lightweight render pipeline, 2D renderer. Right? And let's take a look at a 2D renderer. So 2D renderer has a couple of settings. The biggest part here, the main thing to pay attention to, is the light blend styles. So by default, this comes with just the one at the top, which has a name, and then you can define a mask channel. You can define the render texture scale. These are kind of performance tweaks, really, that you might want to do. And you can define the blend mode. So you can do additive, subtractive, multiply. You can even do a custom, which is basically a mixture of multiplicative and additive factors. Cool, but let's stay simple. Right, let's just do, what did we have just now? Will we multiply? Oh no, I've forgotten. I think we were additive. OK, so the first thing we want to do is the most obvious light of all, a global light. So there's stuff in the scene, right? No? Because I've messed with the, I've messed with that thing. It should have been multiply. There we go. So we've got a global light. So global light, as the name, as you would guess from the name, lights everything. Well, kind of. So the first thing to do here is to point you at some of these settings, right? So the blend style is one of those things that we had earlier, right? Default, or in this case, I have a rim blend style that I may want to use later. Color, of course, and intensity. Now, this is the interesting one for me. Target sorting layers. So if you have different sorting layers set up in your scene, you can get your lights to target just those sorting layers. So you can have a light that just lights the background, a light that just lights some foreground objects. Maybe the character has its own special sorting layer, right? So you want lighting to be unique for the character. And in that kind of, in the nature of 2D development, right, you have this stylistic approach to things. So you don't have to be realistic with lights, right? You can mix it up, make it interesting. OK, let's go through the lights. So the first one I want to show you is a parametric light. OK, so this one here. Let's go to the scene view so you can see what exactly this is. So a parametric light is, as the name says, it's parametric, right? It has parameters. And the main parameter really is just sides for now, right? This may increase in the future. We want to know what people are trying to do. But you can basically just swap this stuff out, right? And as you can see, there is a light on top of this asteroid or block of cheese that is lighting it, right? And the reason it looks soft is because we have this fall off on it, right? So we could turn down this fall off, make it really small, and it looks really sharp, right? So you can do, again, you can play around with the style here. You can just make that nice and soft. You can also change the way the fall-off intensity works. It's either really eased out or really eases in. Cool. So I won't dig into that anymore for the other lights, but that's basically what those controls do. And they're common to a lot of the lights. Next one I want to show you is the sprite light. So let's come over here and look at the sprite light. So a sprite light takes a sprite, which it then uses essentially as like a cookie, right? And that is what will be used as the source sprite to blend over the target sorting layers. Cool. So we can play around with that, right? You can turn up intensity. You can change colors. You can do all sorts of stuff. Very cool. Let's look at a freeform light. So freeform lights are something that we can do in 2D especially, and this is freeform. So you can do whatever you want with it, right? Any shape you want. So here I'm kind of doing like it's an off-screen tractor beam or something, right? It's coming in, but you could add more detail to it. It's good for accenting sections of your level. So let's play around with this a bit. You'll notice it has a shape editor. So let's go in here. Because we're working with this, let's turn down the fall off, and you can see how it works a little more. And then I'm going to come in here and just edit the shape and go, well, you know, actually I want it to kind of do this, right? So then imagine if you wanted a section of your level to look like it was, you know, covered in acid or something, then you could have it green, or maybe it's an alarm section, something's going wrong, then you can do that. And of course you can push out the fall off again to soften that effect, right? Got to be careful of those inner corners. That's a little bit dodgy, but there you go. Cool, right? So all these different types of lights, kind of blending additively over everything. And then the last one I want to look at is point lights. So we have a point light in 2D, and it looks like this. Right, so let's just zoom in on one of them, and we can see that it has inner and outer angle range, right? Let's turn up the intensity on that so you can see it a bit more clearly. You can spread it out like that, so that's pretty cool, right? It also has inner and outer range in the sense of radius, right? And this last point over here is actually a target, so you can point your lights, right? So you can just place things wherever you want. Something I've always wanted. Cool. So there you go. Those are the different light types. So let's open up another scene and zoom in on one of the aspects, right, that a lot of people care about. So normal maps. So you've got something like this, right, and you've got your light kind of applied to this object. And it looks okay. But you want some depth in the scene, right? You want it to respond as if there is actual surface detail. So what we want to do there is we want to turn on normal maps. That's the first thing we do. So let's go to, here we are. This is the rock, okay? What I want is the light. There we are. And one of the options here in the light 2D is use normal map, right? So I'm going to turn that on. And you've got a normal map. But how did we define it, right? So the first thing I want to do is let's find out where this sprite is. Here it is, Glow Rocks B. And earlier on we were talking about the secondary textures. So let's go into the sprite editor and open up the secondary textures module. And here you can define normal maps and mask textures and whatever else you want to, right? So by default, we have mask text and normal map. We'll be adding more in the future. So let's take a look at the normal map for this. So this is something I generated out of Photoshop, right? You can use one of the many other fantastic normal map generation tools, or you can paint your own. and it has an outline, right? So in this case, you're not going to see it in action. We're going to do that in the next scene. So now that this has been turned on, and I want to increase the radius a bit, there we go, and we can see how that's working. There's also a distance parameter for the normal maps. So right now, it's acting as if the light is 0.5 units off the plane that the sprite is on, right? So if we change it to 0, you can see it's lighting it as if it's dead on from the side, right? And it's picking up these edges because of the normal map. If we push it all the way out, you get what you expect, a flatter lighting, right? Because all of the lights are now coming from, 6 units out, right? All the lighting is coming out from there. So let's make it a bit extreme so we can see the effect. Hit play on that, because normal maps look cool when they move. And there you go. Take that, 3D. Cool. Okay, so masks. Don't say? Yeah. So in this scene, we've got our space chicken, Nori, who is sitting here with a backlight, right? And the way we want to simulate that effect is we've got this rim light with a little bit of volumetric opacity. I'll show you what that is. That's a visualization of the light itself, right? So we've got it very, very low, just so that we can see where the light is. But we've also got the blend style set to rim. So this is the part that's a bit different, right? So if we go back to our 2D renderer, you'll notice that there is a blend style here called rim. We made it, right? Just check these and make your own. There is a contribution to performance by turning these on, so as in a negative contribution to performance, so careful. And then we turn on the mask texture channel. So in the drop-down here, what we want to do is 1 minus R, and we want to have an inverse mask, right? So we want it to act on the black areas of the mask. And the reason for that is interaction with other objects in the scene, because other objects have a default mask on them. So if we act on white and the default mask is white, everything will light up. So you want a 1 minus R and black for the active area. And the blend mode is additive. So Nori has the same kind of effect on her as the rocks do. So let's take a look at Nori. There she is. And if we look at the secondary textures, right, there's a mask texture, again, the black outline, and a normal map. Cool. Same thing with the rocks. Let's hit play on this. And we can get that kind of nice sheen right on the edge of objects. Cool. And that's where we are with lights. So coming up later in the year is improvements to all of this stuff, again, based on everything that we hear from you, and shadows in 2D. Cool. So how can you get all of this stuff? Right, so we heard about Pac-Man, Package Manager. So how do you get it? All the Sprite Shape stuff is in a package called 2D Sprite Shape. All the animation stuff comes in several parts. So there's 2D animation, which is all of the Sprite Rigging stuff that we saw today. 2D IK, if you want to set up IKs for the different limbs. So there's support for limb IK, fabric IK, and CCD, stuff like that. And 2D PSD importer, which allows you to bring in all of those layers from Photoshop and kind of interpret all of that data to do more interesting things with the cool stuff that your artists have been setting up. Sprite Swap, which we saw today, is in Unity 2019.2 only. So you'll want to wait for that animation package to drop. It hasn't been released just yet. So if you try to get it to work with the 2019.2 beta that's out now, it's going to be interesting. So I'd give it a week or two. And 2D lights, this relies on the next release of LWRP. When that comes out, 2D lights, 2D renderer will all be included in there, and you can have a play around with it. Also, 2019.2 only. Okay, what you can do. So I like to end the talks with a little bit of, like an invitation to continue the conversation with us, really. So everything we did, everything we work on comes from talking to people who have tried our stuff and want more, or want something different, or want us to do something better. So please try them out. Let us know what works. That's always good, because very often, if it does work, people are enjoying using it and they don't say anything. And it's not that we want, praise. We just want validation that it works. Then we're in a good place. Tell us what doesn't work, which generally speaking, people are really good at. So keep it up, because we want to know more. And what's missing, right? Because we may have just gone the wrong way on something and left some stuff out. Visit the forums. The 2D team is very active in the forums, or they try to be, because your projects guide us. Basically, whatever you're doing, whatever you're making, that's how we decide what we want to make, or what we should make. What are you building and how are you building it, right? So that we understand the process. Because like I said, the workflows are key to getting a lot of this stuff right for your projects, so that you can be successful and have a good time using Unity to make even more amazing 2D experiences. So thank you very much.